Okay, let's test the audio. Is the audio working? Can you hear me? Okay, all right, so good. I just finished reading the first 4 chapters of the White Nationalist Manifesto from Dr. Greg Johnson, and I have to say, this is the most important book that has been written, perhaps since the culture of critique. This book it's amazing. I wrote something called Optimal Biological Continuity of the Self in 2007, and I laid out pretty much the initial arguments that he's making here. I took a zoological approach as you would approach any endangered species. And I didn't realize that white genocide was intentional at the time. And so when I woke up 2 years ago during the Trump election and allowed myself to finally look into the JQ, I then had the inputs that I would have needed to write pretty much what Dr. Johnson has written here. And he's written it so much more concisely than I think I ever could have. So I just wanted to say that being a white nationalist, if you are, and many of my supporters are, should not exclude you from public debate. To say it's some sort of a legal position, as it is in Europe, or to say that it's immoral is wrong. And so I'm going to wait for a few more people to get into the chat here because, can someone post in the chat here what the link to this is so I can share it on my Gab? It looks like the first stream that was scheduled got Jewed. It wouldn't go live. So the point I'm going to make here is that this book is critically important. You have to read it, even if you're not white. If you want to understand what's happening in Palestine, if you want to understand the ethnic cleansing of Europe or all of these other places, you have to read this book. He put it so concisely using the same terms that I used when I first broached the subject of white genocide before I was aware of the Jewish problem. So I'm going to go ahead and I prepared something here. Many of us that were at Charlottesville or other places where we stood up for our civil rights as Americans, we ran into the same critique, this critique that you're rocking the boat, you're disturbing the peace, that somehow we're acting in a way that compromises the peace. So let me go ahead and read what I prepared here. And so it's not an argument to say that whites standing up against the genocide of our peoples are somehow disturbing the peace. I run into this argument from many whites who are on the verge of awakening, mostly from those bourgeois or middle class. This is a fear-motivated response. It is the most selfish and cowardly type of response because it is fear of harm to their own economic and social standing, and not fear of our actions being unjust that motivates this. If they feared that our arguments or goals were unjust, they would criticize the means of our protests or the subject, the content of our protests, and not the ends of the protest, which is repression and terror campaigns waged by the Jews. The ends of whites trying to stand up against Jewish tyranny and ethnic cleansing while the Jews remain in power is terroristic. The ends are terroristic. These are the means employed by the Jews as they employ against the Palestinians. The Jews go after the economic, social, and physical well-being of your loved ones in an attempt to alienate you from your loved ones and your community. This is the same method of dissuading people from standing up to their tyranny that the Jews employ against the indigenous Palestinians when they try to venture back into quote-unquote Israel, to the houses many of them were born in. Fear of Jews, or any group for that matter, committing terrorism cannot be a motivation for action or inaction. We must stand up to terrorism and assert our basic human rights that Jews wish to continue to deprive us of. This disturbing the peace argument is one that many Charlottesville attendees heard upon speaking with their loved ones after the event. This disturbing the peace argument is not sound. Its assumptions are not valid, and I'll address them below here. Firstly, the Jews brought about a situation in which the preconditions for short-term peace were, one, that whites will continue to be scapegoated for all of the world's problems. That's precondition one. Precondition two to not break the peace is that whites will continue to bear this burden of being the scapegoats until we cease to exist, once the genocide being committed against our people is complete. There are several obvious problems with this plan to just keep on using scapegoating of whites to blame all of the whites, all the problems of society on the whites. Whites going extinct would make for more problems than it solves. So the moral thing to do is to stand up against this genocide. Countries that lose their white populations have become worse without fail, such as Haiti and the former colonies where the whites were ethnically cleansed. Even countries where the whites become a lesser population, a lesser proportion of the population relative to their previous percentage of the population, they already begin to deteriorate, such as the situation in South Africa, where the Jews, under Slovo and other Jewish Lithuanian communists that came from the Soviet Union, have been committing an ethnic cleansing campaign against the whites. If you seek to not rock the boat, to be one of the last whites to be targeted for destruction, one of the last whites to be able to make a white flight, then you can enter your golden years knowing that all or most of your children will be doomed to a horrible fate. This is selfish. May as well stand up and try and stop the genocide. If white people are effectively wiped out, we can no longer be held up as a scapegoat for all of the world's problems, and the Jews will have to find their next scapegoat, which they always do. There is no beating a dead horse. When we're gone, we can't be the scapegoat anymore. In summation, submitting to white genocide does not contribute towards the long-term keeping of the peace of non-whites. So even if you are still a self-hating white, you can rest assured that not just whites would suffer as a long-term consequence of whites not standing up to the Jewish plot to destroy races of man. Secondly, it is the Jews that created the situation through brainwashing and incitement against whites, in which short-term peace is predicated on whites not standing up for themselves. As it is not plausible to assume that any group will continuously submit itself to the programs of destruction and discrimination without so much as speaking out against it. If the plan for peace of the next generation is predicated on us all not so much as raising an objection to our people's collective forced march to the gallows, then it is a poor plan, and you must have no hesitation in spoiling this plan. Third point, Third point, it is no noble act to condemn future generations of your own kind to rape, slavery, and scapegoating. If you are planning on raising white children, or if you have already had them, it is your duty to ensure that there is a better world for them to live in, and that their future will not be mortgaged to buy you some comfort in your remaining years. We are not ignorant to the planned genocide at the hands of the Jews, as the vast majority of baby boomers generations ago were. And we have no excuse to keep our heads in the sand in the face of overwhelming evidence that the Jews plan to exterminate our people. Fourth point, for those of you who are still brainwashed to the point that you can only feel empathy for non-whites, and I understand there are many of us in that boat, it is plain to see that Jews are committing genocides against many races of man currently, not just whites. Jews openly advance the goal of exterminating Palestinians, the Assyrians, the Maronites in the current year. If you cannot stand up to Jewish genocide and tyranny in the name of your own kin, maybe you can do it in the name of other people. Fifth point, Jews will not, if we are wiped out from the earth, praise those who's helped the genocide along. They openly brag about the peoples they have wiped out. No, they will slander even those of us who collaborate with their policymakers and enforcers of white genocide. Just look up Pamela Geller's blog posts where she tallies all of the peoples who have stood up to the Jews and have been exterminated. If you are a Christian, just read the Old Testament and look at what the Jews did to the Greek tribes that neighbored them. Not only did they kill all of the Greeks, but they also killed the offspring of the Jews who had started mixed families with the Greeks. And that's my point here, is that you're not disturbing the peace when you stand up to Jewish crimes against humanity. And this is the first time I'm going to explicitly say it as a candidate since I started my political career. White genocide is a crime against humanity, in the same way that the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is a crime against humanity. We cannot be silent in the face of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And I may be running as an America First, nationally social, democratic American patriot, but I urge all of you who consider yourself to be white nationalists to have empathy for those races of man that the Jews are also committing genocide against. Look at the Assyrians, one of the most ancient peoples of the Middle East. Look at the Palestinians. These people can't even go home to the houses they were born in. The Jews stole their land, stabbed their pregnant wives and sisters in the belly, and now they can't even go home. And I really think that we need to take a moral stance, continue to maintain the moral high ground in the face of Jewish genocide. And white genocide, I pledge to you, will be one of my main issues that I'm running on in 2020 when I defeat the other Democrat candidates. I'm going to pull at their heartstrings. I'm going to say what is right. And that is that for the Jews to exterminate the Palestinians, for the Jews to continue their campaign of exterminating the whites is ethnically wrong. And it is our duty to oppose them. The Jews have committed genocide against more tribes of man than I can count, and they brag about it. Just go to Pamela Geller's blog. The old one was Atlas Shrugs or something like that. She did a take on Ayn Rand's book for her blog. She tallies the peoples that the Jews have exterminated. And that tally didn't end in biblical times. That tally didn't end with the Old Testament. It continues to this day. Look up what's happened with Israeli-sponsored ISIS wiping out the Assyrian Christians. These are not just an ethnicity. This is also an ancient ethnic group of the Middle East, very genetically related to Caucasoid Europeans. So Jewish hatred, Jewish crimes against humanity should not be tolerated by anyone. And I ask people to tune into this, even if they're anti-white, to understand that just because the Jews have propagandized you against us doesn't mean that we can't collaborate against the true tyrants, the true terrorists, the Jews. So that was my message for the night. And I think that you really need to read Dr. Greg Johnson's The White Nationalist Manifesto. Even if you wholeheartedly disagree with it, at least understand where he's coming from. Because this is the majority of the white kids in Generation Z. They're seeing right through the self-hatred, right through the programs of indoctrination. And as whites who stand up for our people, see us like the Palestinians standing in front of the bulldozers that have come to bulldoze the pregnant women and the families of the people that have been political prisoners in Palestine. We're standing up for the rights of our people, and we don't do this out of self-interest. We do this out of love for our people. And I can promise you, on my honor, that I won't just stand up for white people. I'm going to stand up for everyone the Jews are discriminated against. Some of the countries that are currently facing crimes, that are currently facing these criminal activities of the Jews, like Japan, where they're being forced to have a guest worker program now. They're in the early stages, the precursors to genocide. And they will advance in their genocide against the Japanese people, the Koreans, the Chinese, you name it. They'll carry out their plans to exterminate all unique races of man. It's in their friggin' Talmud. It's in the Calgary Plan. It's in all of the Jewish leaders' memoirs. It's in all of the people that have been shills for the Jews' own plans. And I don't know if you haven't already woken up to these Jewish crimes against humanity, if what's going on in Palestine or Syria isn't enough for you, just look in your own backyard. You're not allowed to have a white community. You're not allowed to have freedom of association. You're not even allowed to point out that you're not allowed to have a white community. And ultimately, this is America. We have freedom to form communities that serve the interests of its members. And just because you're racially aware, just because you recognize that someone born in Japan doesn't automatically get Japanese ethnicity, just because you recognize simple biological truths doesn't mean that you hate everyone outside of your kin group. And I think it's important for those of us who are racially aware and those of us who are aware of the Jewish question to act in a moral fashion and to reach out olive branches to all of those races of man that the Jews have targeted for campaigns of genocide and incitement. That's about it. I'll look at some questions now. I read this book and it lit a fire under my butt. I mean, this is incredible. This book, it lays it out. It lays out the argument for white existence in a zoological sense, the same way I did when I wrote my paper in 2007. So, yeah, House of Paust, I see you. I got the email. I haven't had time. I've been busy trying to sell personal items here to finance my activities. Oh, wow. Trey R. has been aware of the Jews since he was 13. And he asks about let's see. And the next question's about the ethno-state, as some people call it. I don't think there needs to be a separate country for whites in the United States. I think the 10th Amendment covers all of your concerns. And the 10th Amendment has been infringed repeatedly. Even the Native Americans in this country have sovereign land. I think something similar could be arrived at for people that seek to form sovereign nations for whites within this country. I think that if that's your top priority in life, if that's how you pursue happiness and prosperity, is to build that homogenous community, it's your freedom as an American to do so. And we cannot allow the Jews to infringe on our individual or group rights, which it's become clear since this country was founded that the right of freedom of association is guaranteed. And it only with this tyrannical Jewish controlled government can that right be denied. And it's only selectively denied against certain groups, most specifically against white people. Yeah, okay, Mr. Baseball. Yeah, the Jews killed dozens of millions of people in Russia based on their ethnic and religious identity. Yes, it's an example of one of the many Jewish crimes against humanity. Yes. Okay, so it says Julian Price here makes a great point, and this is one of the reasons I did this podcast tonight. It says, at Little Revolution, self-hating whites and so-called liberals are going to be a problem for you. Well, and I'm inviting them to come to the conversation here and ask, is what's happening to the Palestinians any different than what's happening to the Europeans? And I'd say no. Jews want continent or land ethnically cleansed, and they're achieving that through subversion, through incitement, and through propaganda, and through expulsions. And I don't think that people will continue to be able to say that they don't see what is happening, that they don't know the Jews are behind it. It's becoming more and more painfully obvious every day. And if they aren't going to wake up externally, if they're not going to show that they're awake, they should at least not counter-signal us. And I'd like to reach out to the Palestinian and Assyrian communities and also the Armenians and some of the other recent victims of Jewish crimes against humanity and really start to show our solidarity and assert our rights as peoples to preserve our values and our people. It's a human right to form a tribe, to have freedom of association. I mean, unless the Jews are willing to bulldoze all of the Amish communities, they should not be allowed to prevent new communities from being formed. And I actually think the Jews have been inciting people against the Amish communities because they're too ethnically homogenous. They don't like that. They don't like unique peoples. They want to force us all into this blender. And whether or not you choose to partake in that type of reproduction is your individual choice. It's something where you should be under duress to do so for fear that if your children are pure white, that they'll somehow be the continued scapegoat for the Jewish tyranny. Yeah, end white genocide, absolutely, and stop the genocide in Palestine and restore autonomy to the Assyrian people that have been targeted for extermination by ISIS, which is backed by Israel. Now, Glenn here, I noticed that he has some anti-Trump things to say, and I say criticize Trump where he puts it first. If he's serving Israel instead of the United States, that's going back on his campaign promises. And I think ultimately, even if I don't win in my candidacy, which I seek to do, the ultimate thing that could come from this, even if I lose, is to get Trump to name the Jew. Press 14 if you want Trump to name the Jew. And I want all of you Palestinians out there, all of you Assyrians, all of you Armenians, because the 14 words applies to every people. Just change out a few words. There we go. So the 14 words applies to every people. We're against genocide. We're against crimes against humanity. And the only way to be against crimes against humanity is to name the Jew. And with that, I bid you good night. I'm going to get back to reading Dr. Greg Johnson's The White Nationalist Manifesto, and I'll be preparing a chapter by chapter. I'll be preparing a chapter by chapter response to this book It's perhaps the most important book that's been written since The Culture of Critique. Even if you don't agree with it, you need to read it. Have a good night, Goyim, and remember, divided against Jewish tyranny, we fall. Do not fight any non-Jews. You're just doing the Jews' bidding if you do. Keep the peace, Goyim.